The scream that tore through the Wyoming night air in September 1878 was the kind that could freeze a man's blood, and Vincent Oakes was halfway down the mountain before his mind caught up with his body. He had been checking his trap lines in the high country above Jackson when the desperate sound carried on the wind, followed by the frenzied yapping of coyotes and the panicked squawking of chickens. His powerful legs ate up the rocky terrain as he descended, his long dark hair whipping behind him, muscles burning with the exertion of the sprint downward through the pine forest. The moon was 3/4 full, casting enough silver light to see by, and what Vincent saw when he burst through the tree line made his chest tighten. A woman stood in the middle of a ramshackle chicken coop enclosure, swinging what looked like a broken broom handle at 3 coyotes that darted in and out, testing her defenses. 2 chickens lay motionless in the dirt, but she had positioned herself between the predators and the rest of her flock, which huddled terrified in the corner of the coop behind her. She was wearing a nightdress covered by a heavy shawl, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders, and even from a distance he could see she was trembling with exhaustion and fear. Vincent did not hesitate. He pulled his rifle from his shoulder and fired a shot into the air. The crack of the gunshot echoed across the valley, and the coyotes scattered immediately, their forms disappearing into the sagebrush and darkness like smoke. The woman whirled toward him, the broom handle raised defensively, and in the moonlight he could see her face was streaked with tears and dirt, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of terror and defiance. "Easy now," Vincent said, his deep voice gentle despite the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He lowered the rifle and approached slowly, hands visible, trying not to startle her further. "They are gone. You are safe." She lowered the makeshift weapon slowly, her whole body sagging as the fight drained out of her. Vincent was close enough now to see that she could not have been more than 23 or 24 years old, and that her hands were bleeding from splinters. The fence around the coop was a disaster, posts leaning at drunken angles, chicken wire torn and sagging in multiple places. It was a miracle the coyotes had not gotten all the birds. "I heard them," she said, her voice shaking. "I came out and they were already inside. I've been fighting them for what felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes." She looked down at the 2 dead chickens and her shoulders slumped further. "I cannot afford to lose any more. These birds are all I have." Vincent studied her more carefully in the moonlight. She wore no wedding ring, and he could see no evidence of a man about the property. The small cabin behind the coop was dark except for a single lamp burning in the window, and the whole homestead had the worn, struggling look of a place being maintained by someone working beyond their capacity. "Are you alone out here?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. She nodded, wrapping her shawl more tightly around herself. "My husband died of fever last spring. I've been managing on my own since then." Her chin lifted slightly, pride warring with exhaustion in her expression. "I am Katherine Emerson. This is my land, legally filed and registered." "Vincent Oakes," he replied, touching the brim of his hat respectfully. "I have a claim up in the high country. I was checking my trap lines when I heard you." He looked around the property again, taking in the failing fence, the thin walls of the chicken coop, the general air of things falling apart, despite what he could see were valiant efforts to hold it together. "Miss Emerson, with respect, these coyotes will be back, probably tomorrow night. They know there is easy food here now." Catherine's face crumpled slightly before she mastered herself. "I know. I've been trying to repair the fence, but I do not have proper materials, and I am not strong enough to set the posts deep." She looked at him with those blue eyes that seemed to carry the weight of 100 sleepless nights. "I suppose you think I should sell up and move back east to live with relatives." "I think nothing of the sort," Vincent said firmly. The truth was, he thought she was one of the bravest people he had ever encountered, standing alone against predators in the dark with nothing but a broken stick and pure determination. "I think you need a stronger fence, and I think I can build you one before morning." She stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "You would do that? Why?" It was a fair question. Vincent had lived alone in the mountains for 5 years, ever since he had left his family's farm in Montana to seek his fortune in the Wyoming territory. He kept to himself, traded his furs in town a few times a year, and generally avoided entanglements with other people. But something about this woman, standing defiant in her nightclothes defending her chickens, had stirred something in his chest that he had thought long dead. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply, "and because no one should have to face down a pack of coyotes alone." He glanced at the sky, calculating the hours until dawn. "I will need to fetch some materials from town. Can you stay inside and keep watch until I return?" Katherine nodded slowly, still looking at him as if he might be a dream or a trick. "Yes. Yes, I can do that. But Mr. Oakes, I cannot pay you much. I have a little money set aside, but—" "I am not asking for payment," Vincent interrupted gently. "Just some coffee when I'm done, if you have any." He saw her swallow hard, emotion flickering across her face. "I have coffee," she whispered. Vincent nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Emerson, bar your door until you see me return, and keep that rifle I see on your porch loaded." "I will," she promised. He made his way back up toward the trail that would take him down into Jackson, his mind already calculating what he would need. Posts, good strong cedar if Peterson still had any at the lumber yard, proper wire mesh, not the cheap chicken wire that tore so easily, nails, good forged nails that would hold. He would need to wake up Peterson and probably offer him double to open the yard in the middle of the night, but Vincent had money saved from 5 years of frugal living and successful trapping. He could afford to spend some of it on this. The truth that he was only beginning to acknowledge to himself was that he wanted to spend it on this. On her. Something about Katherine Emerson had reached past all his carefully constructed walls in the span of a 5-minute conversation. It took him nearly an hour to reach Jackson, another hour to wake Peterson and load his mule with supplies, and an hour to make his way back up to the Emerson homestead. The whole time he moved with the efficient speed of a man accustomed to hard physical labor, his powerful shoulders bearing the weight of the loaded packs without complaint. By the time he returned, false dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky. Katherine must have been watching for him, because she emerged from the cabin almost as soon as he arrived, now dressed in a simple work dress with her hair braided back. She had bandaged her hands and brought out 2 tin cups of coffee, which she set on a small table on the porch. "I did not think you would really come back," she admitted quietly. Vincent looked at her steadily as he began unloading the mule. "I said I would." "Most people say a lot of things," Katherine replied, and there was a world of hurt in those simple words. Vincent did not respond to that, just started carrying posts over to the coop. He had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words, and he intended to let his actions do the talking now. Katherine watched him work for a few minutes, then quietly went back into the cabin. When she returned, she had changed into older clothes and was carrying a shovel. "Tell me what to do," she said. They worked together through the pre-dawn hours and into the early morning. Vincent pulled out the old rotted fence posts and dug new holes, sinking each post 2 feet deep and tamping the earth firm around it. Katherine mixed and hauled dirt, held posts steady while he worked, and fetched tools and materials as he needed them. She did not complain once, even though he could see she was exhausted and her bandaged hands had to be hurting. As the sun rose fully over the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, Vincent stretched the wire mesh tight and secured it to the posts. This was proper galvanized mesh, with openings too small for even a determined coyote to squeeze through. He reinforced the gate with cross-bracing and added a strong latch that could be secured from inside the coop. By the time he hammered in the final nail, the morning was well advanced, and the structure stood solid and strong, a fortress compared to what had been there before. Katherine walked around it slowly, running her hands along the posts, testing the mesh. When she came back to where Vincent stood, there were tears streaming down her face. "I do not know how to thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "You have no idea what this means. These chickens, the eggs they produce, it is the only reliable income I have. Without them, I would have to sell the land and leave. And this place is all I have left of my marriage, of the dream my husband and I had." She wiped at her tears roughly. "I am sorry. I am not usually this emotional." Vincent felt something twist in his chest at the sight of her tears. Without thinking too hard about it, he reached out and gently took one of her bandaged hands in his much larger one. "You do not need to apologize for having feelings, Miss Emerson. You have been carrying a heavy burden alone. Anyone would be emotional." She looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face, really seeing him perhaps for the first time in the growing daylight. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of muscle that came from years of hard mountain living. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw shadowed by a few days of beard growth and dark eyes that held surprising gentleness. His hair hung past his shoulders, tied back roughly with a leather cord. "Will you stay for breakfast?" she asked quietly. "It is the least I can do. I have eggs, of course, and some bacon and bread." Vincent knew he should probably decline and head back up to his camp. He had traps to check and work to do. But the thought of leaving her here alone, of walking away from the warmth in her eyes, was suddenly unbearable. "I would like that," he heard himself say. Katherine's face lit up with a smile that transformed her from pretty to genuinely beautiful, and Vincent felt his heart stutter in his chest. He was in trouble here, he realized, deep trouble of a kind he had not experienced before. The cabin was small but clean, with whitewashed walls and simple furniture that showed signs of careful maintenance. Katherine moved around the compact space with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire in the cast-iron stove, pulling out a skillet, gathering ingredients. Vincent sat at the small table and watched her work, feeling something settle in his chest that he had not felt in a very long time. Peace, maybe, or the beginning of something that could become peace. "How long have you been in the mountains?" Katherine asked as she cracked eggs into the skillet. 5 years, give or take. I came out from Montana after my father died. My brothers got the farm. I got a small inheritance and a desire to see something different." "Do you miss it?" "Montana?" Vincent considered the question. "Sometimes I miss my mother, but no, I do not miss the farm. I was never much good at farming. Too restless, always wanting to see what was over the next ridge." He paused. "The mountains suit me. The solitude suits me." Katherine glanced at him over her shoulder. "It must get lonely, though." "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I got used to my own company." He did not add that in the last few hours he had begun to remember what it felt like to want someone else's company, to crave connection. She served the food on simple tin plates, and they ate together as the morning sun streamed through the cabin windows. The eggs were perfect, the bacon crispy, and the bread homemade and still slightly warm. It was the best meal Vincent had eaten in years, though he suspected that had less to do with the food and more to do with the company. "What was your husband like?" he asked, then immediately wondered if he had overstepped. But Katherine seemed willing to talk. "Thomas was a dreamer," she said softly. "He had so many plans for this place. Chickens were just the start. He wanted cattle eventually, maybe sheep. He was kind and gentle and completely unprepared for how hard life really is out here." She stared down at her plate. "The fever took him so quickly. 1 week he was fine, the next he was gone. I did not even have time to get a doctor from town." "I am sorry," Vincent said, and meant it. "Thank you." She looked up at him. "What about you? Was there ever anyone you left behind?" "No," Vincent said. "There were a few girls in Montana who might have been interested, but I never felt the pull to settle down. My mother used to despair of me ever finding someone." He smiled slightly. "She wanted grandchildren." "And now?" It was a bold question, and Vincent saw the faint blush that colored Katherine's cheeks as she realized what she had asked, but he decided to answer honestly. "Now I think maybe I was just waiting for the right person." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Katherine's blush deepened, but she did not look away from his gaze. The moment stretched, full of possibility and the beginning of something neither of them could quite name yet. Finally, Katherine stood and began clearing the plates, and the spell broke. Vincent helped her wash up, their hands occasionally brushing in the basin, each touch sending small sparks of awareness through him. When the dishes were clean and put away, he knew he should leave, should head back to his camp and his work. But the thought of walking away was harder than it should have been. "I should let you get some rest," he said reluctantly. "You were up all night." "So were you," Katherine pointed out. "I am used to it. Mountain living keeps strange hours." He picked up his hat from where he had set it on the table. "Miss Emerson, I would like to come back and check on you if that would be acceptable. Make sure the fence is holding, that the coyotes have moved on." Katherine's face lit up again with that transforming smile. "I would like that very much, Mr. Oakes. And please, call me Katherine." "Vincent," he replied. "My name is Vincent." "Vincent," she repeated, and he loved the way his name sounded in her voice. He forced himself to walk out the door and collect his mule, very aware that she was standing on the porch watching him. As he headed back up the trail toward the mountains, he turned once and saw her still there, one hand raised in farewell. He raised his own hand in return, and then the trail curved, and she was lost from sight. Vincent told himself he would wait a respectable few days before returning. He lasted exactly 1 day before he found himself heading back down the mountain with a brace of rabbits he had snared and the excuse that he wanted to check on the fence. Katherine greeted him with obvious pleasure, invited him in for coffee, and they spent the afternoon talking while he made small repairs around her homestead and she worked on mending clothes. He came back 2 days later with a deer he had shot, helping her butcher and preserve the meat. 3 days after that, he appeared with lumber to repair a leak in her roof. A week later, he brought her fresh fish from the stream and stayed for dinner. Each visit lasted a little longer, the conversations growing deeper, the comfortable silences between them stretching out like warm honey. Katherine began to look forward to his arrivals with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. She found herself listening for his footsteps, watching the trail, her heart leaping every time she caught sight of his tall figure approaching. They talked about everything: his life in the mountains, her childhood in Pennsylvania, books they had read, dreams they carried. Vincent had a dry sense of humor that emerged gradually as he relaxed around her, and Katherine discovered she loved making him laugh, loved the way his eyes crinkled at the corners and his whole face softened. She was falling in love with him, she realized one evening in October as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. The realization should have frightened her more than it did. Thomas had been dead only 6 months, and here she was thinking about another man. But Thomas would have wanted her to be happy, she knew that. He would not have wanted her to spend the rest of her life alone, struggling. And Vincent made her happy in a way she had not expected. He made her feel safe and protected, yes, but also seen and valued. He listened when she talked about her struggles with the homestead, offered suggestions without making her feel incompetent, praised her resourcefulness and strength. He treated her as a partner, an equal, even as his protective instincts were obvious in everything he did. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent asked, his deep voice breaking into her thoughts. Katherine looked at him, at his strong profile silhouetted against the sunset, and made a decision to be honest. "I am thinking about how much my life has changed since that night with the Coyotes, how much you have changed it." Vincent turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. "You have changed my life too, Katherine. I did not realize how lonely I was until I met you. Now, when I'm up in the mountains, all I can think about is getting back here, seeing you again." "Then why do you go back?" she asked softly. "Because I worry about rushing you, about pushing too hard too fast. You are still grieving your husband, and I do not want to take advantage of that." Katherine reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his calloused ones. "Vincent, I did grieve Thomas. I still do in some ways. He was a good man and I cared for him. But what I feel for you is different, stronger. I think perhaps I never knew what I was missing until I met you." Vincent's hand tightened on hers. "Katherine," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm not a man who is good with pretty words, but I need you to know that I'm falling in love with you. Have been falling since that first night. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and I want to be with you. If you will have me." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, but these were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I think I have been since you came charging down that mountain to help me." Vincent stood and pulled her gently to her feet, his large hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "May I kiss you?" he asked, and she loved that he asked, that even now he was careful with her, respectful. "Please," she breathed. His kiss was everything she had imagined and more. Gentle at first, almost reverent, then deepening as she responded, her hands sliding up to grip his broad shoulders. He kissed like a man who had been starving and had finally found sustenance, and Katherine met him with equal hunger, equal need. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast and people will talk, but I do not care. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to help you build this homestead into everything you and Thomas dreamed of. I want to build a life with you, Katherine." "Yes, Katherine said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. They were married 3 weeks later in Jackson by the circuit judge who passed through town. Katherine wore a simple dress of deep blue that made her eyes shine, and Vincent had trimmed his hair and beard and wore clean clothes that emphasized his powerful build. The ceremony was brief, witnessed by the judge's wife and the owner of the general store, but the vows they spoke to each other were heartfelt and true. They spent their wedding night in Katherine's cabin, which was now their cabin, and Vincent was gentle and patient as they learned each other's bodies, building heat slowly until they came together with mutual gasps of pleasure and wonder. Afterward, Katherine lay with her head on Vincent's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, feeling his fingers trace idle patterns on her shoulder. "I never thought I could be this happy," she murmured. "Neither did I," Vincent replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Neither did I." The winter that followed was hard, in the way that Wyoming winters always were, with deep snows and bitter cold that sometimes kept them inside for days at a time. But those days were sweet, filled with quiet domesticity as they learned to live together, to anticipate each other's needs and moods. Vincent still checked his trap lines, but he no longer spent weeks at a time in the high country. He came home every few days, and Katherine always greeted him with joy and kisses and hot food. They worked together to improve the homestead, making plans for the spring. Vincent wanted to expand the chicken operation, maybe add a few pigs. Katherine wanted a proper vegetable garden, bigger than the small patch she had been able to maintain alone. They talked about eventually building a larger cabin, one with separate rooms for the children they both hoped to have. In February, Katherine began to feel unwell in the mornings, and when she missed her monthly courses for the second time, she knew. She waited until Vincent came in from feeding the chickens one morning, and then took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "We're going to have a baby," she said, watching his face. Vincent's expression cycled through shock, disbelief, and then pure joy, so intense it brought tears to his eyes. He dropped to his knees in front of her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing his face against her stomach. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." Katherine ran her fingers through his long hair, her own eyes filling with tears. "Are you happy?" He looked up at her with a smile that could have lit the whole valley. "Happy does not begin to cover it, Katherine. I am overwhelmed. I am terrified. I am more grateful than I have words to express." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and into the summer. Vincent became even more protective, refusing to let Katherine lift anything heavy, constantly worrying about her health. She found his concern mostly endearing, though occasionally she had to remind him firmly that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and she was not made of glass. Their son was born on a hot August night in 1879, with the doctor from Jackson in attendance and Vincent pacing anxiously outside. When he was finally allowed in, he found Katherine propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny red-faced infant wrapped in blankets. "Meet your son," she said softly. Vincent approached almost reverently, reaching out to touch one impossibly tiny hand. The baby's fingers immediately curled around one of Vincent's large, calloused fingers, and Vincent felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "He is perfect," Vincent breathed. "You are amazing. I love you so much." They named him William, after Vincent's father, and he was indeed perfect. A healthy baby with Katherine's blue eyes and what looked like it might become Vincent's dark hair. Vincent took to fatherhood with the same fierce dedication he brought to everything else, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor at night when William fussed, singing to him in a surprisingly gentle voice that made Katherine's heart melt. The years that followed were full and rich. They expanded the homestead gradually, adding pigs and eventually a few head of cattle. Katherine's garden flourished, producing enough vegetables that they could sell the surplus in town. Vincent's trapping continued to provide good income, supplemented now by the sale of eggs and produce and eventually beef. William grew into a sturdy toddler and then a curious little boy who followed his father everywhere, chattering constantly and getting into everything. When he was 3, Katherine became pregnant again, and their daughter Emily was born in the spring of 1882. She had Katherine's blonde hair and Vincent's dark eyes, and she wrapped both her parents and her brother around her tiny fingers from the moment she arrived. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and failed crops, the constant struggle that was homestead life in the Wyoming Territory. But they faced it all together, Vincent and Katherine, building something solid and lasting out of hard work and determination and love. One evening in the summer of 1885, Vincent sat on the porch watching the sunset, same as he had done hundreds of times before. William, now 6, was helping Katherine in the garden, his serious little face intent on the task of pulling weeds. Emily, 3 years old, was playing in the dirt nearby, making elaborate structures that she insisted were castles. The chicken coop stood strong and secure, the fence Vincent had built that first night still solid and sturdy. The cabin had been expanded twice now, with separate bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Katherine came and sat beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder in the easy affection of long marriage. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Vincent pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I'm thinking about coyotes." Katherine laughed, the sound warm and surprised. "Coyotes? If those coyotes had not attacked your chicken coop that night, I might have walked right past your homestead and never met you. My whole life would be different." Katherine was quiet for a moment, her hand finding his and gripping tight. "Do you ever regret it? Giving up your solitary life in the mountains?" "Never," Vincent said firmly. "Not for a single second. You and the children are the best thing that ever happened to me, Katherine. You are everything I did not know I needed." "I love you," she said softly. "I love you too," he replied. "Every single day I love you more." They sat together as the sun sank behind the mountains and their children played in the golden evening light, and Vincent felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what he had been meant for, he realized. Not the solitary life of a mountain man, but this. Family, connection, love, building something lasting with someone you cherished. The years continued to pass, each one layering more memories and experiences onto the foundation of that first night. William grew tall and strong like his father, taking to ranch work with enthusiasm. Emily proved to have her mother's fierce independence and her father's determination. In 1887, Katherine gave birth to another son, whom they named Samuel. In 1890, a third daughter arrived, Grace, completing their family. The homestead prospered, growing from a struggling claim into a successful ranch. Vincent and Katherine made a good team, her practical nature balancing his sometimes impulsive protective instincts, his physical strength complementing her organizational skills. They became fixtures in the Jackson community, respected for their hard work and known for their willingness to help neighbors in need. Vincent never forgot that he had been that neighbor once, arriving in the night to help a desperate woman defend her chickens. He made it a point to pass that kindness forward, helping new homesteaders get established, teaching young men the skills they needed to survive in the mountains, always willing to lend a hand. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Katherine would tease him about that first night. "You took one look at me in my nightdress fighting coyotes and decided you had to marry me," she would say, laughing. "I took one look at you defending what was yours with everything you had and knew I had found someone worth building a life with," Vincent would correct her, always serious when it came to this. "You were the bravest person I had ever seen." "I was terrified," Katherine would admit. "Brave is not the absence of fear," Vincent would remind her. "It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear. That is what you did that night, and that is what you have done every day since." In 1892, when William was 13 and already nearly as tall as his father, Vincent took him up into the high country to teach him about trap lines and mountain living. They were gone for 3 days, and when they returned, William was bursting with stories about tracking elk and reading weather signs and all the other things his father had taught him. "Did you like it up there?" Katherine asked that night as she and Vincent got ready for bed. "It was good to show him those skills," Vincent said, "but I was ready to come home. The mountains are beautiful, but they are lonely. I will never understand how I lived up there for 5 years without going mad from the isolation." "You were a different man then," Katherine said, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind, young and restless and searching for something. "I was," Vincent agreed, turning to pull her into a proper embrace. "And then I found it. I found you." They kissed, long and deep, the passion between them still as strong as it had been in those early days. Some things, Vincent reflected, only got better with time. The children grew and the years passed. William decided he wanted to be a rancher like his father and began working seriously on expanding their cattle operation. Emily announced her intention to become a teacher and began studying in earnest for the examinations. Samuel showed an aptitude for working with horses that delighted Vincent. Grace, the baby, was still young, but already showed signs of inheriting both her parents' best qualities. In 1895, a young homesteader moved onto a claim a few miles down the valley. Vincent rode over to introduce himself and offer help, and found a situation that was eerily familiar. A young man, barely 20, trying to establish a farm with limited resources and less experience. Vincent spent the next several weeks helping him get established, teaching him what he knew, making sure he would not starve or freeze come winter. "You are doing for him what you did for me," Katherine said one evening as Vincent prepared to head over to help with barn raising. "Someone helped me when I needed it," Vincent said simply. "Not with my homestead, but with learning to live in this country. A trapper named Johnson took me under his wing that first year, taught me what I needed to know. I figure I'm just passing it along." "You are a good man, Vincent Oakes," Katherine said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "I'm a man who got lucky," Vincent corrected. "I found the right woman at the right time, and she made me want to be better." By 1896, the homestead had grown into a prosperous ranch of over 300 acres, with a substantial herd of cattle, a large chicken operation that Emily managed with impressive efficiency, and enough income that they could afford small luxuries. The cabin had been rebuilt entirely into a proper ranch house with 6 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and even a parlor with real furniture ordered from back east. But despite the material success, Vincent never lost sight of what really mattered. Every evening he made a point of gathering his family together for dinner, hearing about their days, sharing in their triumphs and struggles. Every night he held Katherine close and thanked whatever forces had brought them together. Every morning he woke up grateful for another day with the people he loved. One spring morning in 1897, Vincent and Katherine rode out together to check on the far pastures, something they tried to do at least once a week. It was a beautiful day, the kind that made Vincent's chest ache with the beauty of the mountains and the valley, and Katherine looked radiant in the saddle beside him, even after all these years and 4 children. "Do you ever think about that night?" Vincent asked suddenly. "The coyotes?" Katherine laughed, the sound carried away on the wind. "I think about it all the time. I think about how terrified I was, how alone I felt, and then suddenly, there you were, coming down the mountain like some kind of hero from one of those novels." "I was no hero," Vincent protested. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Katherine said firmly. "You did more. You did not just scare off the coyotes and leave. You stayed. You built me a fence. You kept coming back. You made me fall in love with you." She pulled her horse closer to his, reaching across the space between them to take his hand. "You saved me, Vincent. Not just that night, but in every way that matters." Vincent felt his throat tighten with emotion. Even after 18 years of marriage, she could still make him feel like the luckiest man alive. "You saved me too," he said roughly. "I was half alive up in those mountains, just going through the motions. You gave me a reason to come down from there. You gave me a life worth living." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, hands linked, and Vincent thought about all the years they had shared, all the moments both big and small that had woven together into the rich tapestry of their life. The births of their children, the hard winters weathered together, the quiet evenings on the porch, the laughter and tears and everything in between. "I want to grow old with you," he said suddenly. "I want decades more of this. I want to see our children grow up and have children of their own. I want to sit on that porch when we are both gray and bent and watch the sun set over the mountains we have spent our lives in." "That's exactly what we are going to do," Katherine promised. "We are going to have a long, happy life together, Vincent Oakes. We have earned it." And they did. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. William married at 20 and brought his bride to live on a portion of the ranch that Vincent deeded to him. Emily did become a teacher, taking a position at the school in Jackson and boarding in town during the week. Samuel started a horse breeding operation that became well known throughout the territory. Grace grew into a beautiful, spirited young woman who kept her parents on their toes. In 1902, William and his wife had their first child, making Vincent and Katherine grandparents for the first time. Vincent held his grandson with the same reverence he had held his own children, amazed all over again by the miracle of new life, the continuation of family. "You are going to spoil him rotten," Katherine said, laughing at the besotted expression on her husband's face. "That is what grandfathers are for," Vincent replied, completely unrepentant. The new century brought changes to the Wyoming territory. In 1890 it had become a state, and slowly but surely civilization was creeping in. There was talk of a railroad line that would run through Jackson Valley, of telegraph lines and electricity and all manner of modern conveniences. Some of the older settlers grumbled about progress ruining the frontier spirit, but Vincent found he did not mind. Progress meant better schools for his grandchildren, better medical care, easier access to supplies and markets. "You have gone soft in your old age," Katherine teased him one evening in 1905 as they sat on their porch watching yet another sunset. They were both in their 50s now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined by years of sun and wind and laughter. "I prefer to think of it as having gained wisdom," Vincent replied, pulling her closer against his side. "I used to think the frontier was about isolation, about being tough enough to survive alone. But I learned that real strength comes from connection, from building something together with people you love." "When did you get so philosophical?" Katherine asked, but her eyes were warm with affection. "When I married a woman who made me think about things beyond trap lines and pelts," Vincent said, pressing a kiss to her temple. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as their children and grandchildren moved around the ranch yard in the evening light. Samuel was working with a new colt in the corral, his patient voice carrying on the breeze. Grace was hanging laundry, singing to herself. In the distance, they could see smoke rising from William's cabin, where his wife was probably making dinner for their growing family. "We did well," Katherine said softly. "We built something good here." "We did," Vincent agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible on that night when I heard you screaming." Katherine laughed. "I was not screaming. I was making strategic noise to scare the coyotes." "You were screaming," Vincent said firmly, but his eyes were dancing with amusement. "Well, it worked, did it not? It brought you running." "That it did," Vincent acknowledged. "Best decision I ever made, running toward that sound instead of away from it." They continued to sit as the sun disappeared behind the mountains and the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The evening air cooled and Katherine shivered slightly. Vincent immediately stood and pulled her to her feet. "Come on," he said. "Let's go inside. I will build up the fire." "I love you," Katherine said, not for the first time that day, not for the 1,000th time in their marriage, but with the same sincerity as she had said it the very first time. "I love you too," Vincent replied, as he always did, as he always would. Inside their home, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together, Vincent built up the fire while Katherine made tea. They sat together in the parlor, her feet tucked under her on the settee, his arm around her shoulders, and talked about nothing and everything. Their plans for the next day, their concerns about Samuel's new horse venture, their delight in their grandchildren, the small mundane details that made up a shared life. Later, as they prepared for bed, moving around each other with the practiced ease of long familiarity, Vincent found himself thinking again about that night 18 years ago. How a simple act of kindness, of doing the right thing because it was right, had led to everything he now held dear. How one choice, to run toward someone in trouble instead of away from it, had shaped the entire rest of his life. He climbed into bed beside Katherine and pulled her close, feeling her settle against him with a contented sigh. This, he thought, this was what mattered, not the size of the ranch or the number of cattle or any of the material measures of success. This warmth, this connection, this love that had grown and deepened over nearly 2 decades. This was the fence he had really built that night, not the one around the chicken coop, but the one around his heart, strong enough to keep out loneliness and despair, sturdy enough to protect what mattered most. "Thank you for building me that fence," Katherine murmured sleepily. Vincent smiled in the darkness. She was thanking him for the chicken coop fence, but his response encompassed so much more. Thank you for letting me," he replied. They drifted off to sleep together. as they had done thousands of nights before, and would do thousands of nights more, two people who had found each other by chance and built something lasting by choice. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead and the mountains stood eternal, and somewhere in the darkness perhaps a coyote howled. But inside their home, surrounded by sturdy fences both literal and metaphorical, Vincent and Katherine were safe and warm and together, exactly as they were meant to be. The years continued their steady march forward. By 1910, Vincent and Katherine had 6 grandchildren, with more on the way. The ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the valley, and the Oakes name was well respected throughout the region. Vincent was now considered an elder statesman of sorts, the man younger homesteaders came to for advice and guidance. Emily married a fellow teacher, a quiet man named Robert, who treated her with respect and affection, and they settled in Jackson, where they continued to educate the valley's children. Samuel's horse breeding operation had indeed become successful, and he supplied mounts to ranches throughout Wyoming. Grace, to everyone's surprise, announced her intention to go to Denver to study nursing, demonstrating the same fierce independence her mother had shown all those years ago. "She gets that from you," Vincent said one evening after Grace had left for Colorado, her trunk packed with everything she owned and her eyes bright with determination. "She gets it from both of us," Katherine corrected. "You taught her that it was acceptable to go after what you wanted, that courage and determination could overcome obstacles." Vincent thought about that, about the lessons they had taught their children both deliberately and by example. Lessons about hard work and integrity, about standing up for what you believed in, about the importance of family and community. But most of all, he hoped, they had taught their children about love, about how love could transform your life if you let it, how it could give you strength you did not know you had, how it could make everything else worthwhile. In the fall of 1912, Vincent was working on repairing a section of fence, ironically enough, when he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He sat down heavily, breathing hard, and when the pain passed a few minutes later, he told himself it was nothing, just indigestion or strain from lifting fence posts. But Katherine took one look at his face when he came in for lunch and insisted on sending for the doctor from Jackson. The doctor confirmed what Vincent had feared. His heart was not as strong as it once was. Too many years of hard mountain living, too much strain on his body. He prescribed rest and limited activity, words that Vincent found almost impossible to comply with. He was a man who had built his life on physical labor, on doing what needed to be done. The idea of sitting idle while others worked chafed at him terribly. But Katherine was firm. "You are going to do what the doctor says," she told him, her blue eyes fierce with determination. "I did not fight off coyotes and build a life with you just to lose you to stubbornness. You will rest, Vincent Oakes, if I have to tie you to that chair." Vincent could not help but laugh, even though the situation was serious. "Yes, madam," he said meekly. Over the following months, he learned to let his sons and sons-in-law handle more of the ranch work. He learned to sit and supervise rather than doing everything himself. It was difficult, frustrating, sometimes humiliating. But Katherine was always there, supporting him, loving him, refusing to let him sink into despair or self-pity. "We are growing old," she said one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching another sunset. "That is not a tragedy, Vincent. It is a gift. How many people get to grow old with the person they love? How many get to see their children grown and successful, their grandchildren thriving? We have been blessed." Vincent took her hand, his grip not as strong as it once was, but still firm, still certain. "You are right," he admitted. "I've been so focused on what I can no longer do that I forgot to be grateful for everything I still have." "That is why you have me," Katherine said, leaning her head on his shoulder, "to remind you when you are being foolish." "I love you," Vincent said, the words as sincere as they had been 34 years ago when he had first spoken them. "I love you too," Katherine replied, "always and forever." The years slowed but did not stop. Vincent's condition stabilized, and while he never regained his former strength, he found a new rhythm, a different way of contributing to the family and the ranch. He taught his grandchildren the skills he had learned in the mountains, passed down the stories and wisdom of his years. He sat on the porch and watched his family work and play and live, and he found deep satisfaction in it. In 1915, the United States entered what would come to be known as the Great War, and Samuel enlisted despite his parents' concerns. He came home 2 years later, changed but intact, and threw himself back into the horse business with renewed dedication. William's oldest son, named Vincent after his grandfather, announced his intention to take over the main ranch operation, showing the same dedication and work ethic his grandfather had demonstrated all his life. Katherine and Vincent celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1919 with a party that brought together their entire extended family. There were now 12 grandchildren, ranging from toddlers to young adults, and the ranch house rang with noise and laughter and life. Vincent sat in his chair and watched it all with deep contentment, Katherine beside him, her hand in his. 40 years, she said wonderingly. Where did the time go? Into this, Vincent said, gesturing at the celebration around them, into building this family, this life. I would not change a single moment of it. Not even the difficult parts? Katherine asked. Especially not the difficult parts, Vincent replied. Those were when we learned what we were made of, when we learned we could depend on each other no matter what. Those parts made us stronger. As the party continued around them, Vincent found himself thinking again about that night so long ago. He was an old man now, his body worn out from years of hard use, his dark hair completely gray, his face deeply lined. But when he looked at Katherine, he still saw the young woman who had stood defiant against the Coyotes, brave and fierce and beautiful. And when she looked at him, he knew she saw not the frail old man he had become, but the strong young mountain man who had come charging to her rescue. Thank you, he said suddenly. For what? Katherine asked. For fighting those coyotes, Vincent said, for letting me help you, for saying yes when I asked you to marry me, for building this life with me, for every single day we have had together. Katherine's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Thank you for hearing me that night, for coming down from your mountain, for building me a fence and stealing my heart in the process, for being the man I did not know I was waiting for. They kissed, gentle and sweet, surrounded by the noise and joy of the family they had created together. And if their grandchildren giggled at the sight of their elderly grandparents kissing, neither Vincent nor Katherine noticed or cared. The years continued their inevitable progression. In 1923, Vincent's heart finally gave out. He died peacefully in his sleep, Katherine beside him, and his passing was mourned by the entire valley. The funeral drew hundreds of people, a testament to the life he had lived and the impact he had made. He was buried on a hillside overlooking the ranch with a simple headstone that read, Vincent Oakes, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. He helped those who needed it. Katherine lived for another 7 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, watching over the ranch that she and Vincent had built together. She never remarried, telling anyone who asked that she had already had the great love of her life and did not need another. When she died in 1930, she was buried beside Vincent, and her headstone read, Katherine Oakes, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She was brave beyond measure. But their story did not really end with their deaths. It continued in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that still operated successfully, in the values and lessons they had passed down through the generations. It continued in the fence that still stood around what had once been Katherine's chicken coop, maintained carefully over the years as a family memorial, a reminder of where it all began. Young Vincent Oakes, the grandson who had inherited his grandfather's name and much of his character, often brought his own children to see the old chicken coop fence. He would tell them the story of how their great-grandfather had heard their great-grandmother fighting coyotes and had come down from the mountains to help, how he had built her a fence by morning, how that single act of kindness had led to everything that came after. The lesson, he would tell his wide-eyed children, is that you never know when a single moment, a single choice, might change your entire life. Your great-grandfather could have ignored those screams. He could have decided it was not his problem, but he chose to help, and that choice gave him 40 years with the woman he loved and a family that continues to this day. The children would run their hands along the old fence posts, worn smooth by years of weather and touch, and they would understand, in the way that children understand important things, that they were part of something bigger than themselves. They were part of a love story that had begun with coyotes and a chicken coop and a mountain man who chose to help someone in need. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew down from the mountains and across the valley, sometimes it carried sounds that might have been coyotes howling or might have been something else entirely. The ranch hands would smile and say it was old Vincent and Katherine keeping watch over the land they had loved and the family they had created. Whether that was true or just a romantic notion did not really matter. What mattered was the truth at the heart of the story. That love, real love, the kind that builds fences and families and legacies, never truly dies. It echoes forward through time, shaping and influencing generations yet to come. The Oakes Ranch continued to thrive well into the 20th century and beyond, always run by descendants of Vincent and Katherine, always maintaining the values and principles they had established. The old fence was eventually replaced, of course, as all things must be, but the original posts were preserved and incorporated into a memorial on the ranch, a physical reminder of where it all began. And so the story that started on a moonlit night in September 1878 with a desperate woman fighting coyotes and a mountain man who heard her cries and chose to help became the foundation of something lasting and beautiful. It became a legacy of love and courage, of choosing connection over isolation, of building something worthwhile with another person. It became, in the end, exactly what both Vincent and Katherine had hoped it would be: a life well lived, a love well expressed, and a family well built, enduring long after they were gone, a testament to the power of a single act of kindness and the love that grew from it.